Hey folks, Matthew Weiss here, WeissAdvice.com. In this video, I am going to be discussing how to EQ your Mixbus. Now, I have seen videos out on the internet floating about on YouTubes and such, and most of them are sort of candy, donut, dessert, ice cream kind of videos, meaning they're going to give you a prescription for how to put an EQ on your entire mix. And it might be something along the lines of like, you know, add a little bit of top end, add a little bit of bottom end, maybe scoop out a little bit of the low mids, and boom, you get this really flashy, glittery, smiley curve thing that oftentimes does sound pretty nice, unless your mix doesn't need that. See, the problem with prescriptive EQing moves is that you can't really tell somebody what to do until you hear what they're doing it on. So mine is a little bit more fruits and veggies. It's not quite as appealing on the plate, but it's better for you in the long run. I'm going to be discussing my approach, and if you get the approach right, then regardless of what your mix sounds like, you'll be able to figure out what needs to be done based on what you have in front of you. All right, let's get in. Let's listen to a little bit of the mix as it is, and then go from there.
Take your place. Stop taking girls on a cruise. In my mind, I'm smiling at you. Oh, why not? Cause Jaja knows it. No one can take your
So in general, I think that this mix is in a pretty good place. All the instruments are interrelating. It's meant to be a very kind of gluey, sort of earthy sounding mix, and I think it's accomplishing that. It's got a kind of light feel, all the things that I'm going for that I would be working inside the mix to achieve. But there's also something that feels a little bit incomplete to it. Like maybe it could be a little bit more exciting, maybe it doesn't quite feel totally 100% polished, so something does strike me as maybe needing to be fine-tuned a little bit. So I'm thinking, okay, might be a good time to check the tone curve of the overall record and EQ the Mixbus if necessary. So how do I know if it's necessary? Well, first of all, my default position would be maybe it's not. Maybe there's something else going on in the mix. And so my very first thought would be, is there something in the mix that needs to be a little bit more exciting? And in general, I really like the balances that I have, so I'm going to not go through that. I already feel confident with the actual inner workings of all the individual elements. Now I know that it's just the general tone curve that I want. So I've made that decision consciously. Now, how do I know if the tone curve needs adjusting? Well, I change my perspective. I've talked about changing perspective a number of times on this channel, and it's something that I talk about a lot on WeissAdvice.com for members, because changing perspective is an extremely important part of really the entire production process, but especially the mix process. So I'm going to listen to this record very, very quietly and very, very loudly. Most of the mixing I've been doing with this record is probably about how you're listening to this video right now. A comfortable, reasonably loud, but not overbearingly loud level. Now, what does it sound like if I start turning the level way, way down or way, way up? So the first thing that I want to do is check the levels way, way down. I'm going to turn my monitoring to just above a whisper, very, very faint. I'm going to see if anything feels like it's disappearing, if anything feels like it's standing out too much, you know, anything that becomes glaringly obvious. So what I want you to do is take your monitors and turn them down, whether it's headphones, whatever it might be, turn them down a good amount. I'm going to play back level so you can turn it down in real time, find something where it's really just above, like a very kind of, you know, it's kind of whispering, all right?
Take your place. Stop taking girls on a cruise. In my mind, I'm smiling at you. Oh, why not? Cause Jaja knows it. No one can take your place. Cause you.
Okay. So if you've turned your level down, it should be very, very quiet. And what I'm listening for is what's standing out and what's not standing out. To me, when I've turned the level down, one thing that I notice very quickly is that a lot of the percussion elements seem to fade into the background more than they should. I kind of completely lose the shakers. I also lose a little bit of pop and polish on some things. So I'm thinking maybe my mix is not quite bright enough.
Take your place. Stop taking girls on a cruise. In my mind, I'm smiling at you. Oh, why not? Cause Jaja.
Like, it's not way, way off, but I feel like everything is really balling up in the mid-range, particularly like the 1K to 1.5K range. And the bass is standing out pretty well as well. So I probably don't need a bass boost, but I'm thinking that we need to add a little bit of something in the top end. So now I'm going to grab a shelf here, and I'm going to basically just start turning up from, I don't know, let's try like 4K. We're just going to pick an arbitrary number here, just so we can start here. I'm going to use a really wide tone curve too. And then I'm just going to start pushing it. I'm going to see what happens.
Take your place. Stop taking girls on a cruise. In my mind, I'm smiling at you. Oh, why don't why? 'Cause Jaja knows no one can take your place.
Okay, so notice that I've turned this up now like 9 dB, and it doesn't really feel unpleasant. If I even go back to a better listening level, so you can turn your monitor back up to kind of a neutral position here. This is an interactive lesson. Go up to the more casual listening environment here. I'm going to turn this top end down, this top end boost down a little bit, and then I'm going to start turning it up again. But you'll notice that in spite of the fact that I'm turning up a lot of top end, it doesn't really feel like it's becoming problematic.
Take your place. Stop taking girls on a cruise. In my mind, I'm smiling at you. Oh, why don't why? 'Cause Jaja knows no one can take your place.
Things don't really start feeling overly bright until I hit about like 8 dB of a boost. So that's a pretty darn good indication that I need more top end in this mix. Now, I've certainly gone too far, but let's back it off a little bit, let's fine tune it a little bit, and let's get something that's sitting a little bit better.
Take your place. Stop taking girls on a cruise. In my mind, I'm smiling at you. Oh, why don't why? 'Cause Jaja knows no one can take your place. Take your place. Stop taking girls on a cruise. In my mind, I'm smiling at you. Oh,
I would say that the upper mids are starting to pinch ever so slightly, so maybe going to a higher corner frequency. Let's try like maybe 6 or 7K. See how that feels?
take your place. Stop taking girls on a cruise. In my mind, I'm smiling at you. Oh, why don't why? 'Cause Jaja knows no one can take your place.
So I think this one, I think maybe a good like 4.5 dB of top end is probably appropriate for what we need here. I'm using a really broad Q. I think that that's working really nicely. If I use a sharper Q, it's going to sound probably a little strange. Maybe not. We'll try.
Take your place. Stop taking girls on a cruise. In my mind, I'm smiling at you. Oh, why don't
It's actually not bad, but it's not quite as smooth as using the wider Q.
take your place. Stop taking girls on a cruise. In my mind, I'm smiling at you. Oh, why don't why? 'Cause Jaja knows no one can take your place.
That feels really good to me. So I figured out that I needed a pretty good amount of top end boost because I felt like the lack of treble was becoming really apparent as I was turning the level down. Now we're going to go in the opposite direction. I'm going to start turning the level way, way up. I want you to do the same. I'm going to play it again through, and we're going to turn it up as we're playing it back. And I want it to be not so loud that it's blowing your ears out, not so loud that it's going to like annoy your neighbors, but loud enough where it's definitely turned up. Like we're kind of in club mode.
Take your place. Stop taking girls on a cruise. In my mind, I'm smiling at you. Oh, why don't why? 'Cause Jaja knows.
So, it's really important that we don't mix at these levels all the time. For one, if we're anywhere where anybody else is in earshot, they're going to start getting annoyed. Two, we're going to start losing our perspective on our hearing very fast if we're mixing loud. So I definitely don't recommend doing that. The other thing is that mixing loud creates sort of a false sense of excitement. If we can make things exciting while they're quiet, we're going to have a much more profoundly exciting record than if we're trying to make something feel exciting while it's loud. Everything feels exciting when it's loud. That's how loudness works. Okay, so we're going to listen through again, and I already kind of picked up on something that I want to adjust, but it's pretty subtle.
Take your place. Stop taking girls on a cruise. In my mind, I'm smiling at you. Oh, why don't why? Cause Jaja knows it. No one can take your place. Cause you've been there.
So it seems to be more present the more elements start getting stacked up, but there is something very slight in the low mids that becomes a little bit blurry and a little bit husky, particularly when all the background vocals kind of jump in together around here. So I kind of hear it. It's sort of like the combination of different instruments and also the O vowel on Chris Daniels' voice. Chris Daniels? What am I saying? Vado's voice. How about that? Yeah, that'll go over well. So here is a way that we can kind of help figure out what that is. And first of all, we could just do it by ear without doing any other tricks or anything like that. And that's probably the best way to do it. Like, I sort of know where it is because I've done this a whole bunch of times, but let's say that I was having trouble finding it. I know what kind of range things are getting a little bit cluttered in. It's happening somewhere in the low mids. So what I've done is I've grabbed a separate EQ, and this is just for monitoring purposes, but I'm taking out the sub bass, and I'm also taking out everything that's over 800 hertz. And what this is going to do is it's going to give me an image of the record with just the low mids playing. And from there, it's going to be a little bit easier to tell what exactly is going on. Right, so if we listen, we can actually hear a very specific grouping of frequencies that seem to jump out a little bit. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab another band here. I'm going to push it up. I'm going to make the Q kind of narrow because I know it's sort of a more targeted range that I'm going for. And I'm going to see if I can hit that specific frequency grouping and make it kind of jump out a little bit. Okay, I sort of found one of them. I think that there's another one as well. So we're going to go a little bit lower from the other end. Let's remember 320. There is something that's happening there. I'm not sure if it's problematic yet. That's the one that I was initially hearing, right there around 480, 490. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to back this off until it no longer sounds cluttered and a little bit over assertive in that range. So I think just a very small cut there is fine, like 1 dB. I want to check this other range here too, because that had a pretty printed sound to it. That to me is making the bigger difference, which is actually not where I initially heard it, so I'm glad that I'm doing it this way because it's giving me perspective that I didn't have before. But I'd say these two cuts are pretty helpful. I'm going to remove this one cut and see if it feels okay without it. That's definitely a little smoother with that cut there, but basically I want to back this off and get as little of a cut as I can get away with. Which is probably pretty close to 1 dB. So I think that we've got it here. I'm going to take this EQ off, and now let's return back to normal monitoring level wherever we had it set before. Let's not listen so loud anymore because that's going to throw our ear off. And let's jump back and let's listen to this again.
Take your place. Stop taking girls on a cruise. In my mind, I'm smiling at you. Oh, why don't why? Cause Jaja knows it.
I have to say, now that I'm listening on a normal playback level, I would say this feels a little bit extreme. I feel like I'm missing some low mids, and the top is now a little bit extended, although it's not terribly extended, but maybe just a little bit. So here with this particular EQ, I have a strength control where I can actually change the degree of how much I'm doing the EQ just all at once with one slider, which might not be a bad way to go. So I'm going to try that first. But if you're using a different EQ, we're just going to start being a little bit more conservative with some of our settings.
Take your place. Stop taking girls on a cruise. In my mind, I'm smiling at you. Oh, why don't why? Cause Jaja knows it. No one can take your place. Take your place. Stop taking girls on a cruise. In my mind, I'm smiling at you. Oh, why don't why? Cause Jaja knows it. No one can take your place. Take your place. Stop taking girls on a cruise. In my mind, I'm smiling at you. Oh, why don't why? Cause Jaja knows.
Nice. So that made it pretty easy, actually, just right around the 66%, so like 2/3 kind of range. Seems to feel really nice. But obviously, if you don't have the slider, you're using a different EQ, you know, the easier way to do this would just be to play it and then start adjusting things.
Take your place. Stop taking girls on a cruise. In my mind, I'm smiling at you. Oh, why don't why? Cause Jaja knows it. No one can take your place. Cause you've been there. Take your place. Stop taking girls on a cruise. In my mind, I'm smiling at you. Oh, why don't why? Cause
Yeah, there we go. Cool. So that's my approach, and the more important idea here is not what I just did in this particular case, because you might find a record where you turn it down and you lose your bass, and so, you know, rather than boosting top end, you might find yourself needing to boost low end, or whatever it might be. You know, it could be anything. You might find that you need more mid-range. There's been plenty of records where I've ended up boosting 600, 700, 800, 900 hertz kind of area, because it brings the vocal forward in a really flattering way. Very often it can make things feel really full in a flattering way, so it really just depends on the record, and that is the point. That is the whole idea here, is that we can create an objective approach. We can't create objective results. The results are based on what we have to begin with and what we want to hear, and that's subjective. But we can find objective approaches, and this one is mine. Alright guys, if you dig this video, hit that like button. If you want to catch more videos like this, hit subscribe with the bell notification. If you want to ask some questions or just drop in to say hi, pop on into those comment sections below. I'd love to hear from you. And also hit that share if you feel so inclined. It helps out the channel, brings out that whole SEO, gets the views up, all those good things. Okay, lastly, you know what we say. We are musicians, sound is our instrument, and I will catch you next time.